So this next video is going to run through the Shield of Achilles. And again, we're going to follow that similar structure that we've been following in the other poems, where we first start off by fleshing out the process or the motivation of political acts, and then in the second half, the impact of such political machinations, right? So I think in the Shield of Achilles, it's really interesting to see how Auden alters the Homeric myth into an allegory of contemporary times, and basically this allows him to critique the destructive consequences of political war. And this is, in terms of form, this is represented through the alternating stanzas between rhyme, royal and ballad format. And so this dual structure, what it really does is it synthesizes the opposing views to create intertwined thematic and formal contrast. So actually, if you do get a question on diverging viewpoints, this one is a really good one to use, because you've already got Thetis's expectations, which diverge from the political reality of modern day war. And actually that plays into my next point, where the deliberate juxtaposition between the idealized expectations of untamed sea and libation and sacrifice really celebrate the natural world, but then are undercut by this mockery and the harsh realism of the contemporary world and the nature of political war. All right, so we start the poem off with these really idealistic images of vines and olive trees, marble, well-governed cities, right? So dispirited by World War II, Auden really articulates the loss of hope by juxtaposing these images of classic vitality against the modern reality of an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. So this deliberate contrast between Thetis's images of splendor and hope and the consequences of modern warfare really emulates, and it really represents Auden's disdain towards the enormously destructive capacities of political regimes and basically political motivations to, gain and maintain power. I think that gives you a really good idea of the political motivations seen within the Shield of Achilles. We also have different imagery, such as 3 pale figures were led forth and bound to 3 posts driven upright in the ground. Here he uses religious imagery in order to emphasize the meaninglessness of political sacrifice within this new age, as he really fabricates this sense of hopelessness within his poems. So now we can actually move on to the impacts. I think the Shield of Achilles is actually a really effective poem in terms of representing the impacts, because he does really create a sense of disillusionment and a sense of disenchantment at World War II, and it's a very post-apocalyptic war, which really, it's a really post-apocalyptic poem which really emulates a loss of hope. So in this first line I've put in there, no blade of grass, no sign of neighbourhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit. Auden intentionally tempers each clause with a negative, and basically the accumulation of no blade of grass, then neighbourhood, then nothing to eat, nowhere to sit, it builds this crescendo of absolute modals that really reinforce the emptiness caused by the destructive political power of war as well as political acts. And basically the barrenness of human existence within a society is represented, where individuality is meaningless due to government oppression, which is both physically and metaphorically portrayed when he uses the imagery, but also the plosives. We've also got Auden delving into the psychological impacts of war, where men lost their pride and died as men before their body dies. So the psychological and spiritual death of these soldiers symbolized, I guess, the stagnation of societies, where individuals were, they were compelled to relinquish their personal freedom and values in order to serve higher authorities. And this was especially the case during wars due to conscription and other methods of war. So Auden clearly depicts, and he clearly represents, the erosion of hope and this moral degradation, which is enabled by a unanimous political obedience towards these really dominant political organisations. I think another line which is really interesting to pick up on within the Shield of Achilles is how there's the militaristic notions of modern governments are shown to replace individuals as a mass entity, especially incapable of independent thought or rational thought. And I think that actually links quite well to September, where Auden really critiques the lack of expression. So here we've got this inability to express oneself, really, because all of the people are depicted as an unintelligible multitude, a million eyes, a million boots in line. So this really indicates, especially when linked with the following line, how they have this unquestioning obedience to an anonymous voice without a face. So the metonyms of boots and eyes, they really reduce the individual to measured objects that only serve the government. And again, this erodes those really hopeful images that Thetis built through, the marble well-governed cities and the ships upon untamed seas. And instead, Auden represents a really hopeless image of the impacts of war. So those are just a couple of examples you can use in the Shield of Achilles. Basically, what I would pick out on first off is the dual structure between Thetis' expectations and the reality of war. And then I would go into the actual impacts of war, so the desolate landscape and the spiritual death that the individuals suffer through, combined with, the lack of individuality. And I think that'll really allow you to flesh out both the motivations and the impacts of political acts and how they're represented by Auden.